gray smoke hissed upward like a signal flare of disaster, curling from the hood of the Quantum Apex hypercar parked in the middle of the tech district. Its glossy carbon shell, worth more than $4 million, trembled as if on the verge of combustion. Phones lifted high in every direction, flashes strobing across the scene, recording the exact moment a billionaire's prized creation seemed ready to die. For Anthony Wright, the man whose empire was built on innovation and prestige, this was more than a mechanical failure. It was humiliation erupting in public. His face drained of color as he watched his exclusive toy sputter into shame. Through the crowd stepped a man who looked nothing like the investors and engineers surrounding Anthony. His beard was rough, his jacket frayed, shoes worn at the edges, yet his voice cut through the chaos with disarming calm. "I am a thermodynamics engineer. I know the quantum cooling system in this car, and I can fix it right here, right now." Heads turned, disbelief etched on every face. Some smirked at the audacity. Others filmed with sharper interest, sensing the drama swelling in the street. The keywords already floated like neon across every mind: billionaire, hypercar, gay engineer, field fix, twist. His name was Thomas Johnson, and he was no stranger to impossible problems. Years ago, he had walked the hallways of MIT as one of its brightest minds, a young genius whose patents promised to reshape entire industries. His notebooks brimmed with equations on entropy, efficiency, molecular flow. Companies lined up to court him, eager to ride the wave of his brilliance. But brilliance, when paired with truth, can frighten fragile powers. When whispers spread about Thomas being openly gay, admiration turned to suspicion. One project spiraled into failure. Blame was pushed onto him, and suddenly his career was not a triumph, but a target. Behind the corporate curtains, it was easier to bury his name than defend it. The collapse came fast, his research erased, his reputation blackened, his path to any laboratory closed. Thomas slipped from offices into shelters, from conferences into libraries where heat and light cost nothing. He taught STEM lessons to kids who had been written off like him, building small machines from broken wires and scrap batteries, proving that science could still give dignity. Yet every night he carried memories of stolen designs, of signatures on patents that were once his own, of a life dismantled not by failure but by prejudice. Now, standing before a burning symbol of luxury, Thomas carried no resume, no polished shoes, only the scars of years spent invisible. But his mind still burned as fiercely as the day he wrote formulas that corporations stole. He knew exactly what he was looking at: a microfracture in the secondary cooling loop, a problem buried inside an internal memo code named XT447. He knew it because he had written that memo himself. The world loves spectacle, and in that moment the crowd had one. A billionaire desperate to save face, a hypercar choking on its own perfection, and a homeless engineer, openly gay, daring to step into the ring. For Thomas, this was not about recognition or money. It was about reclaiming the right to stand in front of a machine and say, "I know this, I built this, I can heal this." Sometimes destiny does not arrive in boardrooms or universities. Sometimes it explodes in smoke on a crowded street, waiting for the one person the system had tried to erase. And sometimes courage, it is not the roar of a crowd, but the quiet step forward of someone who refuses to vanish. Because Thomas Johnson was not just fixing a car. He was about to challenge an entire industry that had told him he did not belong. If this story already has your heart racing, stay with Heart Stories. Subscribe, share, and comment "Truth Wins," so others who've been pushed aside can see that their moment might still come. Anthony Wright's hand twitched toward his phone, and within seconds, two men in black suits emerged from the edge of the crowd. Their eyes cut to Thomas Johnson, scanning his unshaven face, the torn hem of his jacket, the way he stood too close to a machine worth more than a mansion. To them, he was not an engineer, but a threat, an unpredictable body near a billionaire's vulnerable moment. The order was unspoken but clear. Remove him. Thomas did not flinch. He kept his distance, feet planted just outside the shadow of the hypercar, and spoke not to the guards but to Anthony himself. His tone was measured, clinical, carrying the weight of certainty that cannot be faked. "That smoke is not combustion," he explained evenly. "It is a vapor bleed from a hairline fracture in the secondary cooling loop. You see the gray tint, that is XT444H7, the fault signature you buried in your own technical memo." The guards froze, uncertain now. Anthony's brow furrowed. Few outside his company even knew that memo existed. A classified internal document meant only for senior engineers. Thomas's words cut deeper than confidence they carried authorship. He did not merely recognize the failure. He had written its diagnosis long before the car ever touched the street. Anthony's instinct was still to dismiss him. Corporate paranoia had drilled into him the language of industrial espionage, and the sight of a disheveled stranger invoking company secrets ticked every box. But the numbers did not lie. Time pressed harder than suspicion. Every diagnostic counter ticked down toward a permanent cascade failure. Less than an hour before the car's core system would seize and turn a masterpiece into useless carbon. Thomas lifted his hands slightly, palms open, a gesture that asked for patience rather than trust. He spoke of the Apex's three-ring cooling design, the fragile metal junctions that warped under prolonged stress, the way pressure carved invisible lines that only emerged under load. He described, step by step, how to stabilize the fracture using emergency sealant, how powdered graphite scraped from an ordinary 8B pencil could be mixed into the compound to create a temporary molecular bond strong enough to serve until a permanent fix could be installed. He listed the precise tools already packed inside the car's standard roadside kit and added 2 items anyone could buy across the street: a cheap pencil and disposable gloves. It was not the desperate rambling of a drifter. It was instruction precise enough to publish. The crowd murmured, some whispering they had seen this man before teaching science to children at the shelter near the library, building small models that whirred and sparked from scraps. Whispers turned into recognition. This was not a stranger wandering off the curb. This was someone who had given his knowledge freely even while stripped of status. Anthony's silence stretched long, his mind running calculations. If Thomas was lying, the car would fail spectacularly and his humiliation would deepen. But if he was telling the truth, ignoring him would mean watching millions of dollars burn while investors replayed the footage worldwide. In the reflection of the hypercar's glossy hood, Anthony saw his own fear, the fear of being fooled, the fear of losing control, the fear of choosing wrongly under pressure. Yet Thomas's calm refused to crack. He did not plead for belief, did not barter for reward. He offered knowledge the way a surgeon offers a scalpel sharp, specific, and necessary. What mattered was not whether Anthony liked him, but whether Anthony valued the science that could save his machine. The air thickened with expectation. The guards waited for a signal. The crowd leaned closer. The car ticked ominously with heat. Time was running down. In that crucible of doubt, Thomas stood as he always had, stripped of credentials but armed with truth. And in his presence lingered a lesson too many had ignored. The worth of a mind cannot be measured by its clothing, its address, or its conformity to prejudice. Real expertise is not a costume one can buy or a status one can erase. It is knowledge lived, tested, and carried even when the world turns its back. That was what Anthony had to decide, whether he would cling to fear of appearances or risk trusting the man who understood the machine better than anyone alive. With a curt nod from Anthony, the guards reluctantly stepped back, though their eyes never left Thomas Johnson. The hood of the Quantum Apex rose slowly, releasing a new plume of heat. The glow of the crowd's phones painted the engine bay in cold flashes of light, every lens capturing the moment this unlikely figure prepared to attempt the impossible. Thomas's hands moved with deliberate precision. He treated the hypercar not like a machine, but like a patient on the operating table. First, he eased off the pressure, opening a panel near the secondary loop to bleed out the trapped vapor. The hiss was sharp, alarming to the bystanders, but his steady expression told them it was exactly what he expected. He asked for the roadside sealant kit, then pulled from his pocket the pencil bought seconds earlier by a boy from the crowd. With a pocket knife borrowed from a vendor, he shaved the graphite core into a fine powder. Mixing sealant and graphite on a scrap of foil, Thomas stirred until the compound thickened into the precise density he knew would adhere under molecular stress. His fingers, though calloused from years of working with scrap instead of labs, manipulated the blend with the ease of a chemist who had done it 100 times in theory. He spread it carefully across the invisible fracture line, sealing a wound no one else could even locate. Minutes collapsed into seconds as he flushed the contaminated coolant. The liquid hissed and steamed against the pavement, drawing gasps from the crowd. He then refilled the loop with fresh coolant, measuring levels against the etched marks he remembered designing years earlier. When the last clamp locked back into place, the improvised repair stood between the car and total failure. "Hold it under 70% load," he instructed calmly, stepping back so Anthony could face the choice. His words were not a plea, but a prescription. The billionaire hesitated, then reached for the start button. The apex coughed once. Then the high-pitched shriek of instability faded into a deep, steady purr. The smoke thinned, dissolved, vanished. The dashboard lit green with a single word stabilizing. The silence that followed was shattered by applause, rolling like thunder between the glass towers. Strangers cheered not just for a car, but for a man who had done what entire corporations insisted could never be done outside their factories. For the first time in years, Thomas allowed himself a faint exhale, not of pride, but of relief. Anthony extended his hand, the gesture stiff but unmistakable. In that handshake lived a reluctant respect. "Come with me," he said, inviting Thomas to join the investor presentation already underway. It was more than a thank you. It was an acknowledgement that what had just occurred on the street was not a fluke, but a demonstration of intellect too valuable to ignore. Thomas accepted, not for payment or recognition, but for the chance to redirect the narrative. To him, the car was just proof of a larger truth. Knowledge does not live only in pristine laboratories or among polished resumes. It survives in minds that refuse to give up, even when stripped of status and shelter. The crowd dispersed, but the lesson lingered. Appearances deceive, yet competence reveals itself in results. Thomas had reminded everyone watching that science is not magic reserved for elites. It is a language that belongs to those who study, who experiment, who persist even when the world tells them they are no one. And that language, spoken with clarity and courage, can turn the edge of disaster into the hours after the smoke cleared. Thomas Johnson found himself standing before polished glass doors instead of cracked sidewalks. The boardroom smelled of leather and expensive cologne, a space designed for control, for men who moved numbers on screens and shaped markets with a sentence. Borrowed suit fabric itched against his skin, the tie knotted by a hotel clerk who had no idea she was dressing a man who had once been erased from this very industry. To Thomas, the suit was not disguise but armor, a temporary bridge into a world that had long denied him entry. The presentation had already begun. Anthony Wright spoke with practiced charisma, slides glowing behind him in corporate blue. He outlined projections, the promise of quantum thermal systems, the sleek inevitability of growth. Investors nodded, scribbling notes, some only half listening. They had heard promises before. What they had not yet heard was truth, unvarnished by fear of stock prices. Thomas sat quietly at first, observing every chart, listening for what was said and unsaid. His fingers traced invisible equations on his notepad, cross-checking numbers against the physics he had once pioneered. When Anthony concluded with a flourish of stability and expansion, silence settled, polite but brittle. Then Anthony turned, eyes landing on Thomas as though testing his resolve. Thomas rose slowly, the room shifted, tension humming as if an intruder had breached the stage. He cleared his throat, not to command attention, but to steady himself. Then he spoke. 7 minutes that carved through the air with precision. He identified 3 structural flaws hidden beneath the projections flaws that would hemorrhage resources if left uncorrected. He outlined 3 solutions, each drawn from years of silent work scribbled on recycled paper and napkins. He ended with one bold improvement, a redesign that would increase system efficiency by over 30% while cutting costs in ways that stunned even the most seasoned analysts. For a long moment, no one moved. Then questions erupted. How could he know these weaknesses? How had they been overlooked by entire teams? Each answer Thomas gave was grounded not in showmanship, but in principle. He described stress points, material tolerances, energy transfer rates. He spoke in the language of systems, not profits. Yet the investors recognized what it meant for the future of their money. Deals that had wavered on the edge suddenly solidified, commitments doubling in weight. Anthony's company had not merely been rescued, it had been reborn. Anthony leaned forward, voice lower now, stripped of the arrogance he carried on the street. "Name your price," he said, offering the contract most exiled engineers only dream of. Yet Thomas did not smile. Instead, he reached into his worn satchel and unfolded sheets of paper wrinkled from years of being carried without a desk. They were sketches, models, handwritten notes in margins of newspapers, ideas that had lived in shadows, waiting for light. "This is what I've been building," Thomas said evenly. "Not for wealth, but for purpose." He laid out a proposal not for a lab under his name, but for a center in orbit for minds cast off by society. A place where those marked by homelessness, jarred by career breaks, or rejected for their identity could continue to create, not charity, but innovation, not pity, but restoration. He called it the second orbit, a hub for talent the system had chosen to waste. The room had no prepared reaction for such a demand. It was not the usual negotiation of salary or shares. It was a challenge to shift perspective that progress does not come only from those who never stumble, but from those who rise after being buried. In the quiet that followed, the education was unspoken yet undeniable. True leadership is not measured by how tightly one guards the gates of opportunity, but by how widely one dares to open them. And innovation, if chained only to the safe and the privileged, loses the very spark that allows it to change the world. The contract was drafted in polished language, printed on heavy stock, and slid across the table with practiced ease. The signatures of investors gleamed in ink, their fortunes already tethered to the future Anthony Wright had just salvaged. Yet when Anthony lifted his pen to add his name, he paused. His hand hovered, trembling, then pulled back. Without a word, he opened a drawer and placed on the table not another document, but a small, cream-colored envelope. Edges frayed from years of hiding. Inside was a wedding invitation, never mailed. The script bore Anthony's name and another Thomas Johnson. Gasps rippled through the silence. Anthony's voice faltered at first, then steadied, as though carrying a confession that had grown too heavy to suppress. He told them that 3 years earlier, he had been engaged to a man. That man was Thomas. He had written the invitations, planned the ceremony, and dreamed of a life lived honestly. But when rumors swelled, when investors whispered about weakness and tabloids circled like vultures, fear overcame love. He canceled it all, let silence replace courage. And in the storm of backlash against Thomas's career, Anthony had stood by without defending him. The words spilled with the weight of years lost. "I watched you disappear," Anthony admitted. "And I told myself it was safer this way. Safer for the company, safer for me. But when I saw you repair that car, you didn't just mend steel. You repaired the part of me I thought I had buried forever." His gaze swept the room, then fixed on Thomas. "I am done hiding. Today, I choose truth." Flashbulbs erupted as Anthony summoned reporters into the boardroom. Cameras captured his announcement, the founding of the Second Orbit Innovation Center, co-led by Anthony Wright and Thomas Johnson, with explicit commitments to recruit LGBT engineers, to provide temporary addresses for applicants without homes so they would not be rejected for bureaucracy, and to set quotas for those shut out by prejudice. His voice carried firm and clear. The brilliance of a mind cannot be measured by the safety of its past. We will no longer let fear waste talent. Thomas stood beside him, his expression composed, not swept into theatrics. He accepted Anthony's apology, but made clear that forgiveness did not mean erasing the truth. "We begin from honesty," he said. "Only then can justice and progress exist." His words were not bitter, but resolute. A reminder that redemption is not owed, it is earned. The story could have ended there, with applause and contracts. But what lingered was deeper. This was not only a tale of machines and money, it was a revelation that fear, when allowed to govern, steals futures from both the silenced and the silent. And it was proof that even those broken by systems can return, not to beg, but to rebuild them stronger. For Thomas, this was never about reclaiming a past. It was about forging a future where no gifted child would be told their truth made them unworthy, where no engineer would vanish into shelters because of prejudice. His quiet composure before the cameras was the final lesson: courage is not always loud. Sometimes it is the refusal to step back into the shadows, even when the spotlight burns. And so the billionaire and the homeless engineer stood together, not as symbols of pity or scandal, but as partners in a new orbit, one born from failure, forged in resilience, and propelled by truth. Now I turn to you. If you were in Thomas's place, would you have shaken Anthony's hand again, or walked away forever? Comment your thoughts. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Heart Stories, share it, and write "Truth Wins" below, so the world knows that honesty and courage still have a place in our lives.